I just can't help think of who's driving it. 2/3 of our administrative money is coming from the feds. How is that actually impacting this 95% that gets spent in the state of Alaska? And I admit, I cannot get my brain around that in a way that I'm happy with.
Because if our conversation starts with federal programs, there might be a misconception that we as a department are a federal entity, or we're driven by federal programs. So I wanted to spend just a minute giving you the context of the drivers of education in Alaska, the drivers of our work at the Department of Education in Alaska. So the Alaska Constitution, I know you've heard it, it drives our work. It states that we have a responsibility to establish and maintain a system of public education. Alaska statute speaks to our responsibility to ensure that students are successful in their school and work. This slide simply adds the portion that we incorporate when we partner with the federal government. Overall, we get about $232 million in federal funds compared to the $1.5 billion that the state contributes. Of those funds, we're also allowed to keep 2 to 3%. We're authorized to do that for administrative purposes. So some of the things you'll see in tonight's presentation speak to personnel that we have that at least part of their position is federally funded. That is to engage these programs and to get the money out the door and the services out the door to our students.
Commissioner,
yeah.
I have to interject. I do believe, in all honesty, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily agree that the federal government is not the tail that wags the dog. I'm just saying I've had too many folks, both in the school level, the district level, legislative level, believe that, the question is, if that's the case, then we can basically do what we want, that this is a block grant and we can do what we want. But you look at what's happening in other states with lawsuits to try and get out of, quote, Common Core. You look at other states almost daily. Chicago last week or week and a half ago was threatened with being fined by the U.S. Department of Education because they were not, I think it was assessing at a certain time. There were others in Texas that are trying to get a waiver on the evaluation concept that the federal grants had brought with it. They were being threatened with being fined. I hear what you're saying, but there's just too much information out there that seems to indicate that the federal government is taking a very active role in state education right down to the local level. So when you say there's a misconception, I think there's differing opinions. And I think those opinions, a lot of them are rooted in fact and not just imagination. There's stuff constantly in the news. I could go right now on the iPhone and probably pull off 6, 7 different articles happening all over the country just today. And so something is not right. Something is not right because there is a growing and there is a large proportion of folks. I'm not speaking for folks here in the committee. They can speak for themselves, but something is not right in which a lot of Americans believe that D.C. has more of a hand in education than we'd like to think. The question I have is, and this is a guesstimate, how much time would you say the department spent time-wise, daily, on No Child Left Behind issues? The issues in the original No Child Left Behind of 2001. Five 5% of your day, 10%, 50%, 70%.
Are you talking about our overall staff?
Yeah.
The work of the department?
Mm-hmm.
My apologies, Senator Dunleavy. I'm probably not going to be able to give you a percentage. And another document that you receive, I believe, is entitled Personal Services Position Funding Detail. That is specifically for the component of student and school achievement. Those are staff positions, and each position specifically is identified as being either funded through general funds or federal receipts or co-funded. And at the bottom of the third page, it indicates that 53.4% of those staff are funded through federal receipts, and the remainder, are funded through general funds. So a little more than 50% of the staff there are general receipt funded.
Okay, so 53% plus these are folks funded by federal dollars. I mean, one would assume that at least half of their work is related to their federal dollars.
Or federal programs and what we have to do in what school districts they go to. It's the what we have to do to get those, I think, is the part that is missing on this one.
What we're doing is making sure, again, Chair Gaddis, what we're doing is making sure that there's full compliance with those particular programs. And what we're required to do is make sure that program is completely implemented. But it gives you a description of here's what this program's about, and the department's job is to make sure the program is implemented as it's described there.
End of Keller.
Yeah, just take that one if you could. How does EED check for the full compliance, like on that line item? I mean, what standards do you use? Is it based on their report to the district? How do you know? How do you determine the full compliance or not? And are you under the microscope, of course, to see if you're in compliance with your reporting by the feds, or how does that work?
Through the chair, Representative Keller. First off, let me answer your last question first. We are under the microscope from the federal government. When they actually come out to do monitoring, they're monitoring the department. And they do go do visits in school districts, but what they're looking for in the school district is, has the department done its job in making sure the district is following through on the program. So if there is a finding, even if they go out to a school district and say, this school district is not doing their district report card to the public correct, which is one of the obligations that's both in state and federal statute, then the department may have a finding. The district doesn't get a finding in that case. We get a finding, and so we will have to do corrective action to make sure all our districts are doing that. So we're always under the microscope in terms of making sure these are implemented correctly. The next one is one that actually stays with the state, and it's the assessment dollars. And you can see here a case where we have federal assessment dollars that come in, and the federal government requires that those help fund the assessment system. And then there's general fund dollars that help fund the assessment system in the state. And those dollars do all stay at the department, and they fulfill the contracts that we have to run our assessment program.
And are these for specific assessments?
They can be any of the ones, well, actually, the federal dollars have to be spent on the ones mandated by the federal government, and then the full breadth of that line with the GF and the ESEA fund all of it.
I would like to ask you, what are the penalties of not complying with the No Child Left Behind waiver?
Through the chair, Representative Reinbold, we just would lose our waiver. We would go back to AYP. There's no financial ties to it. We would go back to what we had previously.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
And anyway, I just, when you said there was a misperception, I think there's a perception, and I think it could be argued. That if that's the case, we should test our relationship potentially with the federal government and do what we want. But then when I go down that road and I have those conversations with people, people will say, well, you don't want to do that. Why? Well, you'll lose the funding, or this will happen, or you'll be fined. So anyway, I needed to interject a different view.
So how often do you have to give these tests?
These tests have to be given at least once a year to students. And so the current test window is in March and April.
So we're required by law to give them each and every year, is what I'm hearing you say.
Chair Gaddis, we are required by law to give them each and every year grades 3 through 10.
And what happens if we don't? What if we did it every other year?
Chair Gaddis, we would, our title money, all of our title money would be subject to conditions and possible loss of those dollars.
There's no financial ties to it. We would go back to what we had previously.
Chair Gaddis, we would, our title money, all of our title money would be subject to conditions and possible loss of those dollars. And this is the assessment that takes a massive, well, I shouldn't say a massive amount of our staff, but
Well, you see
4
where
or
I'm
5
going
of our
is-
staff, probably full-time, for
Could
part
you-
of.
And at the bottom of the third page, it indicates that 53.4% of those staff are funded through federal receipts.
And I'm wrestling with this issue. That I think the first slide or two that you were speaking to, Commissioner, I think the purpose of that was to either remind or emphasize that we are a state and we run our own system. But the conversations I'm having more and more with folks seem to indicate that it always ties back to the grants and the federal government. And so that's what I'm trying to get my handle on around. Is it the tail that wags the dog? Is it the federal government that's controlling the larger proportion of funding and local control and state control? Or then I'm getting other messages that, no, we would be doing this anyway. This is just, it's opportunistic. In other words, we got the grants at the same time and we would be going in this direction anyway. So it's not just me. I'm just letting you know, there's a lot of folks, not just in this state, but across the country that are going through the same questioning process. Who's in charge of the educational programs of the states? And I'm hearing you say that the state is, but then the conversations having with principals and teachers and superintendents and board members almost exclusively goes back to we have to. We have to do this. We have to. Well, why do you have to? Well, the grants, the federal government, the State Department says we have to. We have to. We have to. And this is very, very subjective, but any idea what you would attribute that to? Because I don't see it in most other aspects of state government, that there's this confusion, disconnect, I don't know how to word it, that this is our program, we got local control, but then when you talk to folks, they're doing their work to meet the guidelines of a grant. Can you help me out?
I can. We do have state mandates. We do have accountability measures, as are expected with the funds that we provide. I will say that even if we didn't have a No Child Left Behind, and even if we didn't have a waiver, we would still be measuring our schools and providing support for those schools that were low performing. We have a responsibility to do so constitutionally, and that's part of the maintaining our system of public education. And that is empowering and supporting supporting our districts, especially when they're struggling. So we would do that anyway. Does it look like this because we have a waiver from No Child Left Behind? Probably. Would it look differently? It might, but we would still do it. The idea that we're doing it because we feel like we have to. 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 We feel like we have to.